Hymen, called by the voice of Orpheus, departed and dressed in his saffron robes, made his way through the vast skies to the Ciconian coast, but in vain. He was present at Orpheus's marriage, true, but he did not speak the usual words, display a joyful expression, or bring good luck. The torch, too, that he held, sputtered continually, with tear-provoking fumes, and no amount of shaking contrived to light it properly. The result was worse than any omens. While the newly wedded bride Eurydice was walking through the grass with a crowd of naiads as her companions, she was killed by a bite on her ankle from a snake sheltering there. When Thracian Orpheus, the poet of Rhodope, had mourned for her greatly in the upper world, he dared to go down to Styx, to the gate of Taenarus, also to see if he might not move the dead.
Welcome to In Each Retelling. This Pride Month, I'm running through the public domain with a pack of wild lesbians to explore all the ways old tales are made new.
Let's go! Let's go, lesbians! Let's go!
I am your host, Jasmine Garcia, and joining me today are...
I'm Ellie McConaughey, and I'd like to ask, is she, Summer from Vivaldi's Four Seasons?
And I'm Shamila Karanakaran, and the invasive species from Sam's podcast has finally made it onto here.
Yes, as you might have guessed from my opening joke, we kind of have an Oops All Lesbians Pride Month going on here, and frankly, it's about damn time.
Not oops, never oops. Perfect. It's perfect, and we love it.
On purpose.
Hell yeah.
And today we are gonna be covering Portrait of a Lady on Fire, the 2019 French period drama / romance that I discovered when I discussed this on Sam's podcast, 6 Degrees of Star Wars, just a couple of months ago, is very much an Orpheus and Eurydice retelling.
Greetings, I am IER60, Star Wars Retelling Connections. Point of intersection found. This is a degree 6. Valeria Galino was in Frida with Diego Luna, and Noemi Melon was in Tar with Julian Glover, who was in The Empire Strikes Back, and Lego Star Wars The Empire Strikes Out.
So I was like, well, I guess I gotta cover this at some point. And frankly, the mythical retellings of anything that acknowledges how inherently queer a lot of those myths are few and far in between. So obviously everyone kind of jumped on this. So with that all in mind, what is everyone's connection to the myth of Orpheus?
Oh god, this is one of those moments where it's just like, there's a guy who's hanging over, a lot of media, but this podcast in particular. Unfortunately, my first major exposure to the myth was a major subplot in Sandman.
Yeah.
Dude is just everywhere when you talk about this stuff on this pod. And it's really interesting because, I'm always trying to bully Jasmine into covering the stuff that I like. Bully
Lovingly so, but yes.
A lot of the stuff that I really love draws very heavily on Orpheus and Eurydice. Obviously, I love this movie so fucking much. This is the second episode I've covered it on someone's podcast, and if I could cover it on mine, I would. I've mentioned in the past that the second book of the Locked Tombs series, Harrow the Ninth, draws very heavily on Orpheus and Eurydice in a very, very tragic way. The final episode of Twin Peaks has an extremely important Orpheus and Eurydice parallel that I can't explain, partially because it's a huge spoiler, and partially because out of context I sound fucking insane talking about Twin Peaks. I keep meaning to see Hadestown. I just never have. I'll stay tuned on that, I guess. That's my connection to Orpheus and Eurydice.
I mean, I guess in a way you were saved from the epic that our Hadestown episode wound up being.
As for me, well, this was one of the myths that was sort of on the periphery for me. I've never actually seen, any major adaptations. I've heard about, stuff like Hadestown, Black Orpheus in passing, but actually, this one was actually my first major exposure to an adaptation.
Wow, interesting. This is a very interesting first Orpheus.
Well, it's interesting as an Orpheus and Eurydice retelling, because I have in my notes, like, I was specifically, I think, of the people on this pod, I'm the one who's seen this movie the most. I saw it back when it was in theaters the first time around. Which, man, we'll get into it when we talk about the ending.
Yeah.
So, like, specifically watching it for Orpheus and Eurydice parallel, it's very much a movie in which Marianne looks back a lot, but the first person who actually has to look back, and in so doing doom them both, is Heloise in the scene on the cliff.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be delving a lot into what this does with it. As for me, obviously, we already mentioned the 6-hour episode of Hades Town that
Good lord.
hopefully by
6 hour.
hopefully by the time this drops, my plan is to have Act 2 finally up as well, because it feels wrong to do a new Orpheus Eurydice without that being fully out. Anyway, and like similarly to Shami, I must have heard it for the first time, because it's one of those things where there's not a lot of adaptations, but it is brought up a lot in art and a lot of poetry. Obviously, like, there's a book that I'm going to be citing a lot throughout this particular episode. It's called Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes, and it's kind of her exploration of how women are portrayed in Greek mythology, and there's a whole chapter on Eurydice. And one of the things she points out is that obviously a lot of artists are fascinated by Orpheus as a figure, because his whole deal is that he is so good at his art that he is able to change hearts and minds enough that he almost got his wife out of death, which,
Death is one of those things you don't really come back from outside of being resuscitated in the hospital, I guess, but even then, that's pretty rare.
I mean, like, the actual whole of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. I mentioned that Twin Peaks has an Orpheus and Eurydice reference there. And what it amounts to is walking out of a proverbial underworld and looking back to find her gone, which is the moment of the myth that everyone remembers. But the actual whole myth of of Orpheus and Eurydice is just kind of a huge downer.
Oh, of course. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because in the first known written version, Virgil's version, it does focus a lot more on the journey through the underworld than it does the part that everybody knows about where Orpheus looks back. But interestingly, one of the things Haynes pointed out is that we get a nice little monologue from Eurydice about how she feels about the whole situation, which, considering how many of these adaptations kind of come from a place of, why is he turning back, and how does Eurydice feel about it? When one of the original ones kind of already tells us that, which really goes to show the creative types will always want to do their own spin on it, even if we already have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, much like Ellie, another particular one was Sandman, specifically the Audible audio drama where Roger Jean Page played Orpheus with a beautiful voice. It's such a shame it was wasted on the works of that man.
I was going to talk briefly about how you're right that artists are fascinated by Orpheus as an artist who has a lot of power. And so a shortcut to understanding a lot of movies, and this definitely includes Portrait of a Lady on Fire, is if it is in any way about the creation of a work of art, and I mean any way. I'm talking about everything from Being John Malkovich to Black Swan here. It is, on some level, therefore, the director exploring how they feel about their own creation of art.
Most certainly.
and this film is very concerned with how art sees people, how an artist sees people, and that distance that creates, both positive and negative. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is, you mentioned everyone's really obsessed with how Eurydice feels. The other major adaptation of Orpheus and Eurydice that I've seen that I'm still kind of on the fence about trying to convince you to cover, Harrow the Ninth. I've had this metaphor with you, and I'll explain it to Shami, because I said it when we talked about it on Sam's pod. Harrow the Ninth is if Orpheus goes in front of Hades, okay, you can have your wife back if you walk out of here without looking out, and Orpheus immediately breaks his neck in a way that he can never, ever, ever look back. And he walks out of the underworld without ever looking back, knowing he will never get to look back to look at Eurydice, and all Eurydice wants is for him to look back. just once.
Yep, and that's really interesting because there's a poem by Carol Ann Duffy that does have a Eurydice that does want him to look back, but it's because she's so sick of his shit. So what she does is she touches him on the shoulders like, let me hear your poem again. And his ego gets in the way of his sense. And she literally just waves goodbye while she goes away. Like, there's a lot of takes on it that are very hard on Orpheus, at least a lot of feminist takes that are hard on him.
And I don't know if you've ever seen the Netflix show Chaos. There is a Eurydice that tells Orpheus to look back at her the same way that Heloise does with Marianne. So I find it interesting that they are the ones asking for Orpheus to turn around because they want to be listened to for once and have agency over how they wish to be seen.
But on the other hand,
another version is this short story by Catherine Valenti called L'Esprit de l'Escalier, where basically it takes that one line from the Ovid version where it's just like his only crime was loving her too much for turning around. And it's just like, okay, so what if he didn't turn around? That would mean this is an Orpheus that does not love her, but it still kind of goes with the idea that Orpheus is just this egotistical artiste type, and poor Eurydice is a walking corpse, basically. Like, she's essentially a zombie in that version.
Well, that kind of, brings to mind the death of the muse. Well,
yeah.
And while I wouldn't say this movie is the death of the muse, quite the opposite, but it's kind of a deconstruction of the idea of the muse. Friend of the show, Charlie, even pointed that out on Sam's episode.
The muse is taking the place of the artist. Like, they're turning the artist and muse stereotype by actually giving Heloise a voice, reminding us that Heloise is a person that exists. So when Marianne shows Heloise that first portrait, she's angry and upset. And when Marianne tries to defend that art isn't always true to life, Heloise claims that there is no life because it's a picture made from a false image, because Marianne is completely dishonest and disrespects Heloise's agency in that first painting. Yeah. And then we have the scene when the muse becomes the artist, where we have that scene where Heloise is ticking off every single detail that she's memorized from Marianne's face and all of her involuntary habits. And then we also see these bits of Heloise taking active part in the process of making the portrait, like mixing the colors, so she's gradually gaining more control in how she wants to be portrayed, despite the portrait being for the explicit purpose of packaging her to potential suitors. It becomes a collaboration instead of a one-sided creation.
Which becomes a point of tension when Marianne sort of imagines her happy about what's going to happen. The basic only real major conflict of the second half, at least conflict between the two of them. The problem is, in the original myth, and you can like this or dislike this, it is a problem that's reasonably endemic to a lot of Greek myths, is that Eurydice is not a particularly strong character in the original myth. As much as we give Sandman shit for a lot of stuff, we give Neil Gaiman a lot of deserved shit. He deserves much worse than he's gotten. The Sandman understands that the Orphic myth is about Orpheus on some level, and Eurydice is not really super important to it, unfortunately. She is his love, but she is not...
She is the object of a fetch quest, basically.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting you point that out, because one of the aims of Pandora's Jar was to kind of show that that sort of thing is actually kind of a misconception. Like, the original Virgil myth actually did focus a little bit more on Eurydice than Orpheus. Like, Eurydice gets more spoken dialogue than Orpheus in that one. We don't hear from him till he's been beheaded by the Minyaids, and he's crying, poor Eurydice. If I may, I would like to just read a bit of the Eurydice part of that. What great madness has destroyed me in my wretchedness, and you, Orpheus? The cruel fates again call me back, and sleep settles on my swimming eyes. And now goodbye. Alas, not yours. I am carried away, surrounded by the vast night, reaching out my helpless hands to you. And then she disappears from his sight like smoke on the breeze.
My point is more about agency and action. He is the one who acts. Even if she thinks more than him, he is still the active participant of the story, which is my point.
And also, Eurydice got into this whole situation because she was running away from someone trying to assault her. So I'm not trying to say Virgil is a feminist ally.
No.
Even if he does at least condemn the guy who's trying to do it.
So which one was the version where she died by snake bite?
Pretty much all the versions are that. she's running away from being assaulted and she gets a snake bite, or she's just chilling with her fellow naiads on her wedding day and still gets the snake bite. So that's basically the accepted canon, for want of a better term, for a myth.
So much so that even Hades Town calls it Songbird versus Rattlesnake when Hades convinces her to go to Hades Town.
It is, I think, reasonably important to the actual myth that, like, and obviously many adaptations kind of forgo this part because, you know, still adaptation, but like in the original myth, I feel like it's reasonably important that her death is not something that Orpheus causes.
Oh, of course.
Oh, definitely. It's like one of the
yeah, no.
disclaimer ones before, because, well, a lot of men in Greek mythology kind of suck.
Yeah, no. Orpheus, at the very least, does seem to genuinely care for her because, you know, going through the underworld is something that he shouldn't have been able to do, let alone come back alive, but...
So we should probably talk about the actual movie.
Yes. Yes. So we begin with a framing device, and our two main ladies are Marianne and Eloise. Marianne is an artist who at one point was basically hired to secretly paint Eloise's portrait for the man she was betrothed to.
Or the one who her sister was betrothed to, because the sister committed suicide, so Eloise is taking her place.
Yes, which...
Eloise was at a convent before this. I feel like is an important element of the story.
Yeah, Eloise was thinking, I'm not going to have to deal with some fucking man my entire life, and then,
Because she was in a convent before this.
But nope. Which, let's face it, a lot of sapphic women have probably turned to that as a solution throughout the history.
It's extremely interesting to me in retrospect, and I didn't notice this the first time or so that I saw it, but like, you know, not having to deal with some fucking man. The only men in the actual flashback is just the captain of the ship that brings her out to the island. It's an island, yes?
Yeah, it's an island.
It's an island, yeah.
You know, he shows at the beginning to bring Marianne, and then he doesn't take Eloise directly, but he is metaphorically there to ferry her away, almost.
Yeah, and that scene where he's, like, putting away the painting and he's nailing the boards in order to keep it, like, waterproof and safe, It's like she's being buried.
Yes. Can I also say, and I can't go into every aspect of the filmmaking that just, like, utterly fucking wrecks me every time I watch this movie. I do think, like, Celine Sciamma, hot take, is one of the best living directors, especially in terms of, like, non-verbal storytelling. And the fact that the dialogue in this film does not actually favor the person who's talking, man, I fucking love that shit. It's so boring when all you ever see is the person talking.
No, that's fair. Like, we're seeing a lot of really interesting reaction shots throughout the film.
Also, sustained two shots. This movie fucking loves sustained two shots.
Oh, for sure. And additionally, something I noticed upon my second viewing of this is how often Marianne is following Eloise throughout it. Like, I'm just immediately like, oh. And the first time she does it is when it almost looks like Eloise is about to die. Oh my god.
And then we got the Eloise being the one to look back in that sequence.
Yeah, like all of the little references to the myth, it's genuinely so masterfully done, and yet it's such a good story in its own right.
Well, because it's not a one-to-one retelling of the myth. You know, Eurydice in this context. I mean, I could make arguments for both of them being Orpheus and both of them being Eurydice. But the stronger one is Marianne is Orpheus and Heloise is Eurydice. But, like, again, as I said earlier, Heloise is the first one to look back, and in that looking does kind of doom them both, if we want to call it being doomed. Do I want to? I don't know.
It's dooming them to a life in society where they cannot be themselves because there's so many restrictions on them. So, yeah, you can say that's doom.
They're doomed to have a tragic romance one way or another. So I suppose we should be glad that it is one where they do get to live on.
It's very interesting because, like, I wrote this... at some point in my life, I started writing this about this film, and I kind of, like, never finished it. You know, Portrait of a Lady on Fire is extremely interesting because France in this time period... Could you be gay in France in this time period? Short answer, yes with an if. Long answer, no with a but.
This is predating Julie Daubigny.
Right, but my point is, like, there are two stratas where you could essentially be gay. You could be where Julia Daubigny and her countess I guess I'll say wife, wound up, where like the law bends so much around power in that time period that you could be openly queer Julia Obney living with not openly, but like basically openly queer Countess, what's her name, and it's fine. No one's going to bother to do anything about it. You were of a certain social strata, you could escape that kind of thing. And like maybe it'd be a little bit of a scandal, but people wouldn't give that much of a shit. There's not really the political will to publish a countess who's sleeping with her female companion. The flip side of that is that if you are two dressmakers from a tiny town outside of Versailles who are sleeping together in the same bed because it gets fucking cold at night, you know, nobody really gives a shit if you're a peasant and you're fucking, or if you're just sleeping together because it's cold. But caught in between those two social strata is a large number of people. Heloise does not have the financial option to tell her mom to go fuck herself and
Clearly, or she would.
run off with Marianne. And Marianne can't sustain herself if she has that kind of social scandal. So it's like, it's interesting that they found this spot where there's basically no way out. I guess maybe they could run off to like China or whatever, but that's not really a reasonable choice. I don't know. I don't know if I had a broader point there. Part of the reason I discarded the piece is because I didn't know where I was going with it. I do that pretty regularly. Just start something with it, try to find it in the writing of it, and it's interesting.
I mean, it all just goes back to what queer people have been saying for literal decades now.
We have always existed. It's just we had a lot more restrictions. And there was a lot more to navigate, and that's kind of part of what this whole movie's about. It's like, clearly they could have had something here, but unfortunately, society wasn't going to let them.
Yeah, and it's not, like, on Marianne or Eloise. It's not their fault for, like, not being, quote-unquote, strong enough or brave enough. The responsibility's not on them. It's the system, the society that doesn't let them live how they want to do. Like, Adele said in an interview, like, you, the patriarchy, are not letting us be alive enough. So, to be able to show that, Marianne and Eloise cannot be together. And if they did the route of, like, them escaping or any sort, or that would just pretty much say that you're just not brave enough, you can evade the system, and it's not really that impressive. And if you went that route, then it would have been a disservice to women in general.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think that there are plenty of very good books and movies about queer people in this, like, in the you're allowed to actually just be together time period that do manage to walk that line. You know, Fingersmith is a very good one. It's adaptation, The Handmaiden. But I do agree on some level that, like, it is an ending where they get away and they live together happily is an ending that, I mean, like, I don't think that it would be right for this story.
Because especially since the ending for The Handmaid, it means they're off to a different society altogether, because they have to actually escape from their condition. There's certain circumstances, because that's the only way that they can be free from those restrictions. But here, I think, especially since there's that class divide, and neither of them are able to sustain themselves without Heloise's noble background, or with Marianne being able to, like, continue painting, it's not feasible in that sense. So that's why they have to part.
Basically, because Eloise's sister
almost certainly killed herself.
Their mother is just all, listen, you've got to paint her in secret because she's not putting up with being painted. And we really want to get this taken care of.
Yeah, the reason, like, the mom wanted this marriage to happen is because she was originally from Milan back in Italy, and she wanted to go back. So she's using her daughter's marriage in order to do that.
This movie is really a lot about the ways women have kind of tried to maneuver through everything that was holding them back at the time. Because you've got, again, Eloise's mother kind of using this as an opportunity to return to Milan. And, of course, you've got the subplot
with Sophie trying to terminate her pregnancy.
We'll definitely go into, even though we kind of talked a lot about it on 6 Degrees, but Shami especially, I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, just the ways that Marianne and Eloise were able to almost kind of create their own mini lifetime together in what short time they had.
That's sort of the core of the film, is encapsulated by the final scene they have together. You know that looking isn't going to change anything that's going to send Eurydice back to the underworld, but it's worth it to look one last time.
Which, of course, was kind of broadcasted in the scene where they do read the myth together. Like, I remember the first time, one of the first gift sets I had seen of this movie was Marianne trying to kind of give her interpretation of why Orpheus turned around. And I had taken some umbrage with it, but she is not the only one who thought that he did it to kind of make the poet's choice, as she put it. But it was something that Natalie Haynes had brought up a lot in Eurydice's chapter of her book, that a lot of people did think, yeah, no, he turned around because he decided he'd rather have the memory of her and this tragic story than a life with her. But it doesn't really paint him in a very flattering way. And so I find it interesting that her own Eurydice was just like, okay, but what if maybe she wanted him to look at her? It's almost like Eloise is trying to defend Marianne in a weird way.
That's sort of one of the things that the original version of the myth you learn in, like, I don't know, social studies class in the 5th grade or whatever. This might be an Ellie specific memory. But, like, you learn the story. The version I learned is, like, kid frames it as, like, if he just held on, made it out of the underworld, and then looked back, it would have been fine. But, like, the Doyleist answer is no. Of course it wasn't going to be fine, because he has to look back, because it's a myth. And some very interesting art has dealt with that. But the Watsonian answer is, what if he walks out of the underworld? He's supposed to never look back again? That's the question Harrow was asking. Is it worth it to have her walking behind him the rest of his life if he can never look back and see her? And I think that this movie doesn't think that's worth it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like, I mentioned this on Sam's podcast, how another thing this movie's really about is just that there's always going to be something you will have to leave behind. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be something that you're going to have to give up in order to move forward in life. And one of the few things that makes it worth it is that at the very least you either get to make art about it or you get to connect with art about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've seen an interpretation where Eurydice having Orpheus look back is kind of an act of defiance on her part. If you compare it to the movie here, like, there's a kind of freedom and a permanence in looking back rather than, like, exchanging one for the other. Kind of like Heloise in her situation with her marriage.
Let's not pretend that we don't have what we had, is what you're trying to say, right?
Yeah.
Just because I have to spend the rest of my life without you doesn't mean we should pretend that this didn't happen any more than we must. So let us have one last look.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a depressing ending in the sense that you have to submit to this and your life is over once you look back. But instead, we have, even after, like, I'm assuming that there is a big time lapse, the second portrait of Eloise in the gallery with, I presume, is her daughter. Like, the love that they have for each other, it has survived. It has sustained them in spite of everything in that's been keeping them apart. So you have that scene with Marianne submitting the Orpheus and Eurydice painting that's based on her relationship with her and Eloise. She's still thinking about her, even unprompted. And with that painting of Eloise in the gallery, at first you see it and it's like that first painting that Marianne did. It's like lifeless, it's stiff, and then you see the book that she's holding. And the number 28. She cannot physically escape and be with Marianne, but she's not letting herself be restricted by that. She is emotionally and mentally free in that regard.
And we should bring up, for listeners who haven't seen the movie, what that page number means.
Marianne drew Heloise a naked portrait of herself on page 28.
This really is Paint Me Like Your French Girls, the movie.
They are the French girls.
Exactly.
I mean, like, so one of the things that, like, I don't know if people... So soundtrack is one of those things that's, like, invisible until it's not in a lot of good movies. You know, if you can tell me a single note off the top of your head from the soundtrack of No Country for Old Men, I'm calling you a liar. And that movie is an incredible movie, so that's not a slam. So, like, I'm the only member of this viewing who saw this movie in the theater, and one of the things that really struck me about the final couple of scenes is that is the first time outside of the bonfire scene, which is a cappella music, that you hear music. Because there's no soundtrack to this movie. And,
I mean, other than the times Marianne's at the piano, but you're right.
Yes. There's only diegetic music in the movie, and because there's, you know, it's the 1600s and there's no radio, there's no, you know, they're not wealthy enough to have someone hanging around the house playing the piano.
So there can only be live music.
There can only be live music, And so that means there's a brief moment where Marianne plays the harpsichord not great, not well. There's a scene where a bunch of women at a bonfire are singing a song. And there's Summer from Vivaldi's Four Seasons that is played in the final scene, which is the song that Marianne was trying to play Heloise. And, like, that coming in the final scene, in the final very, very long shot of Heloise, it's like the entire theater suddenly just got filled with music in that scene the first time I saw it. I really wish this movie would go back into theaters.
That'd be amazing. People. I would love to see it in theaters now.
Come on, people. It's one of the best movies of the century. Just fucking do it.
Mm-hmm. And that music is kind of what brings Eloise back to life. Because she mentioned, like, at the beginning, like, she was only exposed to convent music at the side. Mm-hmm. So when she's first exposed to Vivaldi, it's not just the memory of Marianne. She cries to a music that Marianne played for her because Marianne allowed her to have access to art that she never experienced before. And she challenged her, made her cry, made her laugh, and that's the thing that Eloise is going to be carrying with her, and that no one can take away.
Yep, regardless of the fact that they have to pretend that they never loved each other, that love is still with them. It still changed the both of them, and it's probably within the narrative probably would have followed them for the rest of their lives, which is both tragic as hell, but also really beautiful.
Oh, well, you know, they could kiss 100 boys in bars, shoot another shot, try to stop. I'm going to be making Good Luck Babe references this entire month. You have me on all 4 episodes this month, don't you?
I do, and I'm good with it.
My one rule, one Chapel Roan reference per episode. Hold me to that.
Only one? I mean, all that I say, good luck, babe.
I say that like I don't... Like, my way of saying I'm ready anymore isn't H-O-T-T-O-G-O.
Speaking of Orpheus and Eurydice, apparently Patrick Page did a dramatic reading of that. That's amazing.
I don't want the world, but I'll take this city. Who can blame a girl? Call me hot, not pretty.
So, speaking of Orpheus and Eurydice, there's some sort of references to Aeneas and Dido, especially in that scene where Eloise's dress catch on fire. So, for those who may not be so familiar with the story, Dido commits suicide on a funeral pyre out of despair after Aeneas is forced by the gods to abandon her in order to continue his fate to become an ancient founder of Rome. So later on, when Aeneas journeys to the Underworld, he is shocked and devastated to encounter Dido's spirit there as well, and he learns that he is the cause. He tries to excuse himself, but Dido refuses to look at or acknowledge him. Instead, she turns away from Aeneas and goes to join her first husband who died before her.
Good for her. I mean, you know, as good for her as it can get with the Underworld. but okay, yeah, I definitely see that. That's an interesting parallel there.
I mean, like, the scene where her dress lights on fire is obviously, like, just an incredibly visual scene. It's a very visual movie. It's actually, every time I watch it, I'm reminded how, you know, there's so many quotes from this movie that are fucking burned into my brain that I forget how light on dialogue it is overall.
You just have that music playing in the background, like echoing and like building up and swelling while they're looking at each other, and as the dress catches on fire, it's like Eloise doesn't even react to it. It's like she looks down at it and looks back to Marianne. It's not until like Sophie and some of the other women like put the fire out that she even reacts.
The thing with Eloise is that she is so desperate to fucking feel something. Like, and to feel something besides all the anger and grief she's feeling. So I think that's part of why she kind of let it go for so long.
I did some research on like the music for the bonfire scene. It's called La Jeune Fille en Feu. It's written by the film by Parawan, and apparently their biggest inspiration was Yori Liadi's Requiem. And if that sounds familiar, it's famously used in 2001: A Space Odyssey. The main lyrics, non possum fugar, can be translated to "I am not able to escape all" or "I cannot flee." So that kind of alludes to the inevitable feeling of falling in love and the way that Marianne and Eloise are constrained by their time and place. In reverse, the song's coda has the lyrics "Nos lesos más," which means "we rise," which is kind of fitting about a movie where women are building a place from which they can kind of transcend their surroundings and their circumstances. So Celine actually talked about the lyrics in an interview that she did. She took an aphorism from Thus Spake Zarathustra and translated it from French to Latin using Google Translate, which, if you've used it, you know it's always going to be wonky. So the original aphorism is usually translated into English: "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly."
Ooh. Ooh. Oh, that adds a beautiful new layer to this. I'm going to have to rewatch it again now. This movie is kind of like walking into an art museum and just kind of looking at all the beautiful paintings and figuring out what it all means and your own interpretations of it. And each time you look at it, and like no two people are going to have the same view of it, and you're never going to have the same view of it more than once.
Not unlike the stories that we talk about on this podcast regularly. I just...
So good. This is such a good movie.
I mean, I said my opinion on it just a minute ago. It's one of the best films of the decade, probably the century. I don't know, there's just something about it. This is the second episode that I've been on about it. I will probably... I can't really bully River or myself into being... Maybe I could talk about it like notable snubs. Can I whinge for a brief moment about how France put up Les Miserables?
Yeah.
Instead of this.
And not even a Les Mis that resembles the Les Mis that obviously would be most relevant to this podcast.
I get why France did that. I also get that they probably weren't going to win anyway. That was Parasite's year. But
yeah.
And also, like, Parasite was also a Neon movie, and Neon doesn't have a big Oscar war chest, so they probably put all their weight behind Parasite. But you couldn't give me anything, not even a nomination, Academy. You're really going to tell me that this movie doesn't deserve Best Costumes nomination over fucking Joker, Academy? Look me in the eyes and tell me that.
I forgot that was a thing.
Yeah, poor Ellie is doomed to not ever forget that Joker was a thing.
I'll remember it when I'm fucking dead. You tell me that you really needed fucking Harriet nominated for Best Actress instead of this? We're gonna fucking tell me, Academy? God.
Don't tell Sam about that. Apparently Sam actually kind of liked Harriet. But anyway.
Which Harriet?
The Cynthia Erivo.
Oh, that one.
2019, aside from Parasite and maybe Laura Dern for Marriage Story, is just an Oscar year where I'm just like, every single pick, I'm like, that's what you went with? Really? You went with Renee Zellweger and Judy over fucking Saoirse Ronan? Okay, whatever you fucking say, Academy.
Yeah,
whatever you fucking say.
Like, I semi-defend Judy, and even I'm like, but anyway.
Whatever, I'm off on a tangent.
Something that I really love is that first kiss scene where they're coming together, they're pulling down their masks, and before kissing each other. Like, Celine actually said, like, about that kiss, she wanted to challenge the kissing scene, which is either traditionally the surprise kiss during a rain shower, or the obvious kiss thanks to mustard on the corner of the lips. And she thought it was fake. It's not about finding the magic. Like, she wanted to craft a scene that would embody the sexiness of consent. So people are always questioning the idea of asking consent in France.
I mean, not just in France, let's be real.
It's like the French culture of gallantry, where we say that asking for consent would not be sexy, it would break the mood. She wanted to challenge that, because at some point she came up with the idea of having to unveil their mouths like they would undress themselves. So they put on a scarf, justified by the strong wind, they pressed their lips together, and thinking you would see the heavy breathing through the moving cloth. So
I can understand that from a cinematography perspective, from a movie perspective, having them stop to physically ask, hey, can I kiss you? It could fuck with your flow. I can understand that.
Oh, for sure.
I think that there are ways that you can get that across visually without it fucking up the flow scene. This one is a very good one. To name another lesbian example, during the sex scene in Arcane, there's a moment where one of them kisses the other, like, very suddenly, and then, like, physically stops and gives the other girl a chance to pull away, and she pushes back in. So, you know, it's just making sure.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Man, I want to rewatch Arcane, too.
Unfortunately, probably not for my pod.
No, I don't think any. I think it's eligible for Sam's, but that's
Yeah, it is. Also, there is something like about that bonfire scene and like the scene that comes after where they both get high. Like I was confused by that scene at first because I didn't realize that was what was happening. So
I'm sorry, Shami.
I know. So the late night all female social gathering around the bonfire kind of has very witchy vibes. And this is only reinforced with that sequence with Marianne and Eloise experimenting with a topical psychoactive drug that they get from the healer, which I did some research on this, and given the time and place and the fact that they applied under their arms, it can only be something called flying ointment. So a little more context on that. It's a hallucinogenic ointment said to have been used by witches in the practice of European witchcraft. Plants from the nightshade family, like belladonna, mandrake, hemlock, and glosbane, are used to make it, and the chemical compound it produces is literally nicknamed Devil's Breath.
Oh, interesting. You know, I did always kind of think the bonfire scene felt a little witchy. And
I don't know, having like that undercurrent would explain those Marianne having those ghostly visions of Eloise in her wedding dress.
I think it's fine that it's never really fully explained what that is, because this isn't an abstract movie, but since it does have so much to do with art, it does make a certain amount of sense that they would be going for some abstract moments.
You could probably go there. I don't actually recall if she starts seeing her before or after the bonfire scene. But, like, the point is her seeing Eloise in the dark and turning around to see her before she's swallowed. Like, the point of the scene is more the emotional state. I will say, one, thank you for telling me about this, as I'm going to have to ask the girl I'm seeing who is a witch about this.
That's a sentence.
You know, as I've gotten to say on a couple of occasions, my boyfriend's Jewish, my girlfriend's a witch. I'm living my best life.
Hell yeah.
But also, like, you can cut this joke if you want, Jazz, but I have to say it anyway. Man.
Go for it.
Taking drugs via armpit is the most French fucking thing ever. And I mean that as a positive right now. I don't always mean that as a positive. No, I can't really explain that in any coherent way. It's just vibes, man. You know, the French can be both positive and negative. You know, on the one hand, they made Portrait of a Lady.
As with anything.
On the other hand, they gave their Best Director award to Roman Polanski the year they made Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I'm sure Shami read about this, and I know I've told Jazz about this, but Celine Sciamma and the cast of this movie
walked
out shouting "Viva la pedophile."
Yep, because it seems like we keep on doing that.
And it also, unfortunately, kind of ruined Adele Hanel's career. Although I think her accusing the first director she ever worked with of sexually assaulting her also kind of did that, because the world is a nightmare. And the French film industry is also a complete nightmare.
Yeah, so, dear listeners, if you love this movie and wonder why the actress who plays Eloise isn't in more films, that's why. And feel free to chew glass about it.
No, make Roman Polanski chew glass.
Yes.
You're so right.
Stuff it down his throat.
Who assaulted her.
Editor Jasmine here. Please note that this is a joke, NSA.
It's so frustrating because these are really fantastic performances all around.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much that they say with just a look.
They're apparently so close. Adele is actually Celine Sciamma's ex.
Yeah.
And, you know, Nomi Merlant wrote a movie with Celine Sciamma that came out a couple years ago that I actually haven't had a chance to see yet, called The Balconettes. I've heard it's good. I haven't seen it, unfortunately. I've heard it's good but extremely mean-spirited, which means it's kind of an Ellie vibe movie.
So a little bit more context about, like, you know, you can sort of see the film about as, like, Celine Sciamma's relationship and breakup with Adele Hanel. Because I know that they dated when they were filming Water Lilies, but they remained friends and collaborators even after breaking up. So you can probably see the core message as, you will always be my muse, and I will always deeply love you. Which, well, considering that Adele is essentially playing herself in the film.
Oh, that's fascinating. That could have been so messy. I'm glad it doesn't seem like it was.
But speaking of this movie being incredibly French, I did take like 9 years of French. Like, I'm Canadian, so obviously that was a prerequisite. Some fun language stuff that they do here. So because Since Marianne and Eloise are in different social classes, they address each other with the formal pronoun vous. Even after they get together, there's only 2 occasions where they use the informal version, tu, where Marianne is telling Eloise not to fall asleep on their last night together, though that would be ne dors pas, ne dors pas. And when Eloise is telling Marianne to turn around, she says, retourne-toi.
Oh.
Like, there is always kind of that distance between them because they kind of have to have it. But that it's only in that last night with them together where they're really just kind of spilling their guts at each other in the most beautiful way possible. Oh my god. Again, there's just layers and layers to this.
No, not French, check.
Oh, check. I'm sorry, I misheard. Thing is, I'm trying not to repeat everything that I said on Sam's podcast. Dear listeners, please listen to Sam's episode on Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I'm in it, Ellie's in it, dear friend of the show, Charlie is in it. It's a lot of fun and works as a nice companion piece, I think.
Since we're doing shameless plug, you should listen to my episode on the piano, because Celine Sciamma said in an interview that the shot at the beginning of Heloise leaping into the water after her canvases is intended to be like picking up where the end of the piano, where the main character of that leaps into the water, drops her piano in the water, basically. No, I'm not kidding. She said that. I get a link. Not just shamelessly plugging my pod. Watch the piano. It's really good.
So, should we explain the character of Sophie? Because we've mostly been focusing on, Marianne and Eloise.
Which makes sense, of course, it's their love story. But yes, we should talk about Sophie, too.
So, Sophie was essentially Eloise's sister's maid, but she became Eloise's maid. And in the movie, she has an unwanted pregnancy. So, she tries to get rid of it by doing all these exercises that Marianne is showing her, because Marianne has experienced pregnancy.
You might say she has known love, as Eloise puts it.
Eventually, she has to go to the abortionist because there is no other way to get rid of that unwanted pregnancy.
It is a really harrowing portion of the film. And in fairness, a lot of it probably just comes down to how rarely we see those kinds of situations end that way in film. Most of the time, if there is an unexpected pregnancy, you're gonna have a baby by the end of the movie. But this is one of those rare times where we not only are ending with the termination of that pregnancy,
they decide to keep it because it's the good girls avoid abortion route.
Yeah. Add in the fact that it is from the times when people like to pretend this sort of thing didn't happen, and the fact that short of showing anything graphic, we are there every step of the way. One of the characters out and out basically demands we look at what is happening. And it's a lot, even as someone who is as staunchly pro-choice as I am, of course. And I think that goes for everybody on this podcast.
If we look into our film history, this is kind of a point in history where films about women with women directors were kind of trying to push back on that. We had, I think, at least 3 buddy comedies back to back about 2 women who have a wacky adventure trying to either get an abortion or get some Plan B.
Yeah, that's literally the film, Plan B.
Okay, there's that. There's a much more dramatic Sometimes Never, Rarely, Always.
That's true.
It was a moment where and I think that unfortunately that moment kind of passed. There was a moment there where abortions were actually being talked about a little bit more in film. It's a difficult conversation to have in film. The discussion we have about abortion in American in particular popular consciousness, not as much in French, to be clear, as much in European, but the discussion we have about abortion, both sides of the pro and anti-choice political divide are extremely desperate to make the conversation happen around abortion, if that makes sense. To discuss abortion without abortion ever being the actual topic, if that makes sense.
No, of course, it makes perfect sense. I kind of mentioned it on Sam's podcast. It's not really something anybody really wants to have to talk about because it's a sad thing to have to exist. Whether you're pro or anti-choice, it is a sad thing when this does have to happen. Which it does sometimes, to be clear.
So, having this depiction of someone seeking an abortion where it's not actually even that big of a deal, they don't actually ever explain what she's doing in the first half of that scene. You can infer what she's doing if you know what you're looking at, but they never have a conversation about it. She just says, no, I don't want to keep the baby, and they just get to work. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's about like these two women coming together for their little sister, basically.
Sometimes a family can be a lesbian couple and their cool adult child.
Exactly.
And we're just not going to think about the fact that that entire family got torn apart by the end.
But yeah, this really is at least partially a story about the solidarity between women. Not even just the romance between women, but the ways that women have been there for each other in times where their rights were so limited.
The painter who is not allowed to, like, present her works under her own name. She has to present under her father's name because she's not recognized on her own merit. And she's also forbidden from painting men. We mentioned, like, Sam's episode on this movie, like, several times. There was that question of what the purpose of that scene of Marianne painting that scene is, and Celine actually addresses this in an interview. She says there's this French author named Annie Ernaux, and she wrote a book about her own abortion. And in this book, she says, there's no museum in the world where there is a frame called the abortion. It's an everyday thing, but it's never represented. And why? And also, earlier in the film, like, Marianne is saying that female painters aren't allowed to learn male anatomy, so they can't, quote unquote, grade subjects. And then they do that, like, female anatomy is right there. So that scene where Marianne is painting it, it's almost as a form of defiance.
This is really about a lot of women who would otherwise not really be given a whole lot to say in a lot of narratives. You know, you've got the woman who's about to be a wife.
You've got the maid and you've got the painter who has to enter all of her work under her father's name in order to get any sort of recognition. And like you said, she can't even paint male models to learn that form. And, you know, they claim it's about modesty, but of course Marianne even calls it out. It is solely to prevent them from being great artists, because men, or at the very least the patriarchy, is always so threatened by what will happen when women have the full power to do things on the same level as men.
I mentioned that this movie is extremely French, and, like, love it or hate it, the French film industry is a lot more comfortable with sex and violence. You know, you want to see some of the most horrifically depraved horror films you've ever seen in your life, you go to the fucking French, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, the current French extremity horror films have me reverting back to my fraidy cat looking up the summary on Wikipedia out of curiosity, but never touching the actual movie stage.
More to the point, the French film industry, the European film industry, and by that I am excluding the UK from that, is much more willing to have a movie that takes its time, that sits there with stuff, and makes you think about it. You know, I don't know if anyone's ever come up with a solid explanation for that doesn't just involve saying, like, I don't know, man, Hollywood. But it is a film that is not gonna, like, it's not fast-paced. It is a movie that's going to hold on a shot for a very long time to watch the character react. You know, the final shot of the movie is, what is it, a 2-minute long of just a woman crying. I think it's brilliant. I have for years, and I'm going to shut up now.
Like, again, there's just a lot of layers to this movie. If you take anything away from this, dear listeners, I hope you do give it a try. Definitely be emotionally prepared for, you know, a more pensive. And to call it slow feels like I'm insulting it. No, it's very deliberate. Every decision is on purpose. It's a feature, not a bug, basically.
Yeah, and in that scene, we're Marianne in that moment. We're watching the woman we love be out of reach. We're watching her experience joy, regret, and grief. And in a way, it's like saying goodbye. It's almost like a strange sense of closure.
You know what it's like? Almost everybody I know who has lost somebody will have moments where they forget for a moment and they think, oh, I really got to tell so-and-so this, or, oh, this would make so-and-so laugh so hard, let me go text them. But of course, then they remember, and that remembering is almost like Orpheus turning back, because, of course, by remembering, they're dead again. So it's almost like that, where Marianne gets to watch Eloise for that brief and shining moment where Eloise doesn't even know she's there. But of course, it's just a brutal reminder that she will never have that connection again.
Eloise, murder your husband. Send Marianne a letter and murder your husband.
Pull a handmaiden.
Mm-hmm.
Listen. You think I'll condemn you because you killed somebody? Do you know the stuff that I like? Heloise, murder your husband.
Listen, we respect women's rights and women's wrongs on this podcast, and to be honest, it's debatable which one that would be. But in all seriousness...
And on a more serious note, it's just like, it's actually showing just how clever Eloise is, because she's just like, hey, my girlfriend is obviously going to be at some galleries. Let's give her something if she happens to come across this painting. The smartest thing they did was take this tragedy and show that even though both of them do live in the end, that doesn't necessarily make it less tragic. Maybe one of them might as well be in the underworld at this point, with how much distance there's always going to be between them.
Really, the only comfort there is that Eloise is definitely still thinking about her, because, again, we see her holding on to that page, and we see her crying over Vivaldi.
There was that scene where, apparently Titanic was a major inspiration for it, because Solely thought of it as queer, because, at that time, Leonardo DiCaprio was completely androgynous, so...
Oh god, that reminds me of this stand-up routine that was done by Janine Brito.
And all of my girlfriends were super into Leonardo DiCaprio. And you might think, oh, that's a save. Leo is a lesbian. 25% of lesbians are some form of Leonardo DiCaprio. All ages at this point. A lot of you in this room look like some Leo in the timeline.
But also, of course, this is basically Draw Me Like Your French Girls, the movie.
Ellie would probably like Titanic if it was like that.
Who said I don't like Titanic? I like Titanic.
But you would like it even more if Jack was butch.
Well, obviously, yes, it is a universal invariance that replace any man in a movie with a hot butch, the movie is instantly better. Statement of fact.
More about Titanic. Celine said she thought that Titanic was a huge success because it was a love story with equality and with emancipation. So some of the inspirations that she took from it was the idea of present of a love story and the memory of a love story. So she thought that a sexual love story shouldn't be about eternal possession. It should be about emancipation. And Titanic was essentially an emancipation story because Kate Winslet's character lost Jack, but we see her being free and riding horses and wearing pants. And the success of love story is not how long it lasts. It's not about ending your life together. The dying is tragic, but it's not the end of the story. In equality, there is emancipation. That's why Marianne says, don't regret, remember.
Oh god, I'm going to start singing for good, and then I'm going to be crying through the rest of this episode. Let us move on.
I mean, I think that there's a moment where Marianne comes close to regretting. One thing I noticed very heavily on this particular rewatch is, she hugs Sophie, and it's hug, beat, beat, beat. She hugs the mother, beat, beat, beat. She hugs Heloise and basically immediately has to shove her away.
Because she wants to hold her like a lover so bad.
Yeah, exactly. She has to get away from that because she can't hold it together. But I think that the fact that she looks back when Heloise demands it, I think that she can come to understand that, just because it ended the way it did doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing. And obviously they're still both thinking about each other a lot. Heloise is still marking page 28, is I think what the kids are calling it these days.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be showing up in every portrait of her from now on.
Should I turn that into a euphemism for jilling off?
No, but the way she's fingering that page.
Ooh.
To get a little crude with it, that's sort of the initial visual of Marianne sticking her fingers in Heloise's armpit. It's not visually subtle there.
It's the equivalent of sending nudes.
You gotta wonder what would happen if Heloise did see Marianne at the Crown at that opera.
Physically, she's still in that everyday life, but mentally, emotionally, she is rebelling.
I mean, it's the Orpheus and Eurydice thing. The answer is she's fated not to look. The question of whether or not they could be together, there were historical figures who carved out little spaces for themselves, very famously Emily Dickinson and Sue Gilbert.
And Anne Walker and Anne Lister.
I was going to use, the reason I went with Emily Dickinson and Sue Gilbert isn't just because I'm, like, obsessed with Emily Dickinson. It's because, like, Sue got married to Emily's brother, and they just kept on fucking. Like,
good for her, honestly.
She basically convinced Austin to not move to Michigan, to stay near Emily. So, like, there were people who carved out spaces for themselves, but, like, I think that the ultimate tragedy of Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and sort of like the tragedy of Emily Dickinson, is that they had to, like, carve out little secret spaces for themselves. And I think that the reason we have this month that this episode's being released in, well, not recorded in, is to remind us of that and to make it so that our spaces don't have to be secret anymore, which is getting kind of dicey out there, folks.
Yeah.
If you're a straight person listening to this, maybe help out a little. Oh, God.
Please, maybe. And if you're a queer person out there, we cannot cede any goddamn ground. It has not been that long since people had to hide this much. There are countries where they still have to hide this much. And it never should have been the case. And it cannot be the case again. We have already lost so much to homophobia, to all the bigotries, but in honor of Pride Month, that's the one we're focusing on. But with that said, movies like this are also a good reminder that in spite of everything that was standing in the way of our queer predecessors, that they were still able to carve out a space for themselves. Like, to me, that's really powerful, especially in times where it is scary to be queer.
You know, queer people of all stripes, the earliest written instances we have of queer people existing come from the ancient Sumerian texts. And the reason that's the earliest written appearance we have of queer people is because nobody else had writing before that.
Yeah.
We have always been here, no matter what the kinds of people who would like us to not be here say.
Fuck off. We existed before your god, and we will be here after.
Stop trying to censor us. You already did with picture of Dorian Gray.
And I own a copy of the uncensored annotated version of it, so they didn't even do a good job of that. From the bottom of my gay little heart, fuck off.
But speaking of Dorian Gray, like, I did find this interesting parallel. So Dorian's wish is for his portrait to change. It's for his portrait to change and age while he's always frozen in youth and continuing to do debauchery everywhere forever. So in reverse, as long as Marianne is still painting and making changes to Eloise's portrait, they are allowed to stay on that island, suspended in time, and live the life that they want, as queer and as beautiful as they wish. But once it's finished...
Oh, that is an interesting parallel. And also, it goes to show, R.I.P. Basil Hallward, we're different.
Yeah, but once it's finished, like, Eloise's life is going to be the thing that's changing forever, while her portrait is going to be the same. It's going to be a relic of time for where a couple of days she could be immortal with the woman she loved.
And I guess in that way, they do make the poet's choice to a certain extent. So, in a way, both Marianne and Eloise were right about their own Orpheus and Eurydice story anyway. But yeah, as Eloise plunges into the darkness after asking for her beloved to look at her one last time, why does Orpheus and Eurydice endure?
Because love and loss and art go hand in hand. And even as we continue to live on and make new things, we still carry it with us. If there is any substitution for love, it's memory, and what better way to preserve that memory than creation?
God, you fucking just completely undercut me by putting it really well. Damn it.
I could reverse it in editing. It's fine.
No. You should absolutely put her first. I mean, like that, you hit the nail on the head right there. It's, you know, as much as so much of our society is built around pretending, even if we don't acknowledge that's what we're doing, pretending we're going to live forever. Pretending we're not going to die. Every major chunk of society is designed to keep you from remembering you're going to die. I'm going to die. Every single person you have ever met or will ever meet will one day die. So no matter how things go, you know, every relationship is going to end that way. You mourn or you are mourned. And so I think that art that engages with that shows that you can love someone enough to journey into the underworld to get them back, and it's still not enough. I think that's always gonna hit a note.
Like I said, there's always stuff we need to leave behind, and one of the few ways to cope with it is to make art about it.
And what is this myth except an ode to that very concept? By creating art about what we have lost, in a way we are preserving it. By looking back, we can preserve it, even if it means that they are plunged back into darkness.
But, like, it doesn't mean that it wasn't there. To quote the sequel to one of our Orpheus and Eurydice comparisons, you can't take loved away.
And that's why, unlike their mythical counterparts, Marianne and Eloise make sure to not regret the time they had together, because just because it's gone doesn't mean it wasn't there, doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And while a part of them might cry, poor Marianne, poor Eloise, they lived a beautiful life together in those few days.
Final thoughts?
Sometimes love is being willing to ruin your good painting for a chance of it being a great one. And sometimes the work of loving someone is worth the pain of losing them. Which are surprise tools that will help us later in the next couple of episodes.
My final thought is Celine Sciamma hasn't made a feature film I've been able to see since 2021. Get fucking on it.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a hate crime.
Yes, I know she made something last year, but I haven't seen any ability to see it. Where she made a short documentary. I want get her more money.
So homophobic.
Mm-hmm. Only you can prevent queer filmmakers from not getting enough money to make queer films.
Yeah, go see gay movies. Get more out of life. Go see a fucked up movie. Or a gay movie. Or an interesting movie. Yeah, because I was going to say,
this is not a terribly fucked up movie.
I mean, I'm quoting John Waters there, who was a great queer filmmaker. No, I'm saying, like, go see a movie that challenges you. This movie might be difficult, but, like, it's worth it.
Go watch it along with The Handmaiden. It makes for an excellent double feature.
Or if you want to pair up your challenge with something a little more familiar and comforting, I do still think this pairs really well with Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 one. All right, who's got stuff to plug?
As indicated on several occasions, I am the host of The Biggest Night in Podcasting, where we talk about Oscar-winning films, randomly determined. As I mentioned, we have episodes on The Piano and on Cries and Whispers. We actually have an episode for Pride Month on a little-known, pretty obscure movie that certainly didn't inspire people to be really annoying on both loving and hating, called Everything Everywhere All at Once. We've got some great stuff upcoming, too, you know? Yeah.
And editor Jasmine here. Shami had to step away at that point, so I'm actually going to do the plugs because I forgot to ask her to record them separately. Oops. But you can find her on the Online Muse on Tumblr. You can find her work for this podcast as well as Sam's podcast on the Tumblrs for In Each Retelling and 6 Degrees of Star Wars. And for this week's Heroes Call to Action, I do want to first give a big old shout out to any listeners who were at the No Kings protests this Saturday. We salute you. You are truly the heroes of this generation. And additionally, I would like to encourage you to check out the resources page on orlandogaychorus.org. These are queer artists that are doing everything they can to help their community, particularly in a state that is not terribly welcoming. And as always, you can find me at Favorvera on all the socials, and you can find this podcast on Blue Sky and technically Twitter at IAR Podcast. To help us reach the next chapter of our story, please consider donating to our Patreon, our Ko-Fi page, or the Spread the Show link below. Or if you are unable to support us monetarily in these really financially uncertain times, please consider rating and reviewing us on the podcatcher of your choice, and spreading the word to any queer nerds in your life that might want to hear about us. Or any nerds, really. We don't discriminate, not even on Pride Month. And speaking of the next chapter of our story, as well as Pride Month, next up, we're actually kind of breaking open the IER vault. This was going to be an episode for last month's Pride Month and then last month's Wrath Month, but it didn't end up happening. But now we are going to be going into more spooky territory with The Haunting of Bly Manor. We hope you will come join us, and remember, stories gain power in each retelling.
They took the upward path through the still silence, steep and dark, shadowy with dense fog, drawing near to the threshold of the upper world. Afraid she was no longer there and eager to see her, the lover turned his eyes. In an instant she dropped back, and he, unhappy man, stretching out his arms to hold her and be held, clutched at nothing but the receding air. Dying a second time now. There was no complaint to her husband. What then could she complain of, except she had been loved? She spoke a last farewell that now scarcely reached his ears, and turned again towards the same place.